Hello, everyone. My name is Wayne Childs, Director of Technical Solutions at General Code. I have spent the majority of my time at General Code specializing in developing intelligent ways to meet the unique code access needs of planning, building, and zoning professionals, along with the ultimate users of those codes. And that's really who we're focusing on today, with a real user focus. In addition to a career focused on innovative solutions and publishing technologies, I'm also a planning board member in my hometown and an active member of the American Planning Association. So not only am I interested in the code and code publishing and technology aspects, but also in the service to my community through being part of the planning process. I have a perspective in seeing things from a few different angles. My colleagues, Jeannie Sanders and Kayla Lindsay, will be on the webinar today to assist me in fielding questions and keeping the webinar running smoothly. We have a fair amount of valuable concepts and solution examples to cover in today's webinar, and we will reserve time for a Q&A session at the end of the webinar, so we'll try to hold questions until then. If you experience any audio or video issues or have a question that cannot wait, please feel free to use the question pod in GoToWebinar. There are several polls included in today's presentation, so I hope to have a little give and take and a little conversation, so please be prepared to participate in those polls. Your input is really valuable. This webinar will be archived. You can see on your screen here, we actually have an archive on generalcode.com of our past webinars. So today's webinar, if you do want to reference anyone to it, will be contained on that archive for future reference. So if everyone's ready, let's get started. Our first user-centered zoning webinar operated on the premise that zoning regulations have become increasingly complex and sometimes difficult for property owners to understand and interpret. Here's a quote from a respected professional planner that echoes this concern and challenges all of us who have had a hand in communicating these codes to our constituents to do a better job. Mike Ernst, the Director of Planning at the Municipal Art Society of New York, said, "To understand zoning, you have to have a law degree. It's so convoluted and so dense. The whole process of how buildings get built these days is so confusing and opaque to people. There really should be more transparency so people can have an understanding of what the future holds for their city." This quote is really rich. There are several points that we really should be paying attention to as servants to constituents. And from a codifier's perspective, I definitely am paying attention to when you talk about opaqueness and density of code. And you'll see some solutions today in a case study in how a client of ours is really doing a good job breaking down some of that opacity and some of that density and really presenting information to people in bite-sized chunks that they can handle. So user-centered government as a whole is a movement. I'll cover some of these basics presented in our last webinar series just to set a foundation. Like I said, we have an archive, so if any of this background interests you, our last two webinars walk participants through some very specific steps that they can take to improve their zoning and land use codes by adopting a user-centered focus. In the end, local government is in the business of promoting the public good. Plans and zoning codes tend to be intimidating and hard to decipher, even for staff. I know I've seen it firsthand in board activities. I've seen it in my municipal government. There's quite a bit of confusion and misunderstanding, and people just holding good faith differences in views on what the code really says. So it's really important to have that code material at hand in a way that people can easily access and understand it. For far too long, resident customers have accepted lackluster performance from government. That's not acceptable anymore. Those expectations are really changing rapidly, especially considering a new generation of adults have spent their entire lives accessing information digitally. We cannot ask them to go backwards into an analog world. When designing how your codes and processes work, think like Amazon or a highly successful local retailer in your community. How are they taking care of their customers? what steps are they cutting for their customers in improving their processes and the experience of their customers. Answering questions about the code is not a good use of staff or constituent time. We should strive to cut down on the amount of time spent searching out answers. So user-centered design really is three legs to it. People, process, and technology. And today you're really going to see how somebody in a community is really leveraging all three legs of this: people, process, and technology. User-centered design permeates everything in successful businesses. The complete user-centered design solution, it involves people, process, and technology always. So I'd like you to see those themes carry out through the examples that I'm presenting today. So in our last webinar, some lessons learned that carry over that have direct connections to what you're going to see today. Maintain a user-centered focus. So governments are moving toward user-centered design everywhere. Partner with others. Tap into the knowledge of others around you. You'll definitely see some of that today. Partnering too, partnering with others and tapping to that knowledge. Don't feel like you have to do everything yourself. Know your users and their needs thoroughly. Do not make assumptions. Understand their pain points in particular, because pain points are often how we're judged in our performance for the public, and commit to eliminating those pain points. Finally, never stop improving. Today, we're going to be reviewing how the Township of Upper Chichester, Pennsylvania, has successfully implemented many of these principles to ensure that their zoning and land use code meets the needs of its users, is more clearly understood and accessed by its users, and most importantly, has been designed to meet its users' needs in the first place. So before we get into any of today's case study, I'd like to do a quick poll. The question is, what do you consider to be the users of your community's greatest challenge regarding its zoning and land use code? So the people in your community who are using the code, what are they having the hardest time with? Is the difficulty mainly in accessing it, understanding it, the code itself being out of date, or not meeting the community's needs at all? I can tell you from the codifier's perspective, we see that a lot, obviously, when we see zoning codes and land use codes being some of the most frequently updated parts of the code. And then finally, other. If we're not hitting on any of those driving factors, as far as what is difficult for your community about the code, please let us know that. Maybe later in Q&A or in email afterwards. If I haven't captured what's going on with the participants today, let me know what else is out there as far as difficulties for your community. So I'm seeing understanding it over 50%. So we got 58%. The difficulty is in understanding it. In second, 25%, it's out of date. It doesn't meet the community's needs. 13% is other. So, I definitely, like I just said, I'd like to hear from you, whether that be in the Q&A section or afterwards through an email. And surprisingly for me, again, this is a good example of having bias from your perspective. Accessing it is only 4%. So accessing, probably because the advent of tools and technologies has really helped that out. So thanks for your input. That's really helpful. So let's talk about our case study today, Upper Chichester Township, Pennsylvania. Upper Chichester Township is located in Delaware County, Pennsylvania. It has a population of around 17,000. It is comprised of 6.7 square miles. So Delaware County is in far southeastern Pennsylvania, between the city of Philadelphia and Wilmington, Delaware. At 17,000 and 6.7 square miles, it's a fairly dense suburban area located between several major cities. So it is a community of relatable size and scale, with many of the same development challenges facing most American communities, I would say. Barbara Kelly is someone who I've worked with closely. Barbara is the Assistant Township Manager of Upper Chichester. She's been in public service in some form or another for over 30 years. She's a trained mediator and that's really clear to see once you see some of the work products she's produced and some of the groups. You can really see being a trained mediator really helping, who serves and understands and encourages residents, businesses, and education leaders and government and education officials, helps them through collaborative projects that really benefit the public overall. She's generated a lot of new ideas and turns them into actions that better serve the community. And she uses a wide variety of interconnected tools. And I really want to stress the interconnected, and I want to try to show you this today. I'm not going to be able to show you all of it, but I will leave you with links. You'll be able to reference these websites and do a little bit deeper dive on your own if you're interested, because interconnectivity is really important between these different websites and tools. This has really helped create partnerships between private development, local government officials, and the public to make these relations more efficient and effective. So the first spoke that I want to take a look at in Upper Chichester's wheel of interconnected tools and technologies supporting user-centered service is their community engagement website. Heart and Soul is Upper Chichester's community engagement group that develops and maintains the plans and goals for development within the community. And at the end of the day, much of the activity of Heart and Soul community engagement actually informs the local government on what should be contained in the code. Upper Chichester's done a wonderful job keeping the community engaged. So let's go ahead and we'll take a look at the engagement website. So we look at the website, and the first thing that jumps out right away is core values. This is no mistake that core values is actually the entry point for this website, because the core values is what has led Heart and Soul to be so successful. The value statements are incredibly important, and Barbara and the team has really taken time to explain how did Heart and Soul start? Why was it started? What makes it special? How many people are involved? Really to give you a sense of the community is really driving how the community is developed. And you can see these, very clearly displayed values. Sense of community, very important. And if you dive into their zoning code is often seen as a cold legal document. You really, if you understand the values that are driving development in that community and you look at the zoning code, it really comes through. You can really start to see where this group's fingerprint is all the way through to the code. Those development regulations and guiding principles for the community. Safety is very important for the community. Education, very important. Economic opportunities, we're going to see a little bit about that later, about how economic development is being supported, and community resources and recreation and open spaces. That's clearly going to show through in a zoning code regarding how a community sees its resources and wants to share them with the public. I talked about interconnectivity before. I want to note Facebook links over on the left, Facebook link on the top, and YouTube videos on the top. Very important to have those linkages to social media. So next, we'll take a look at the Heart and Soul Community Engagement Facebook site. So maintaining a user-centered focus is really aided through the use of social media. Social media gets a really bad rap, and I'd be the first to admit, with 3 kids from their 20s into their teens, I've seen the negativity that social media can bring, but social media also provides a magnificent platform for collecting input from the community. A social media page like a Facebook site provides live ongoing forums to collect community feedback. It provides a platform to share your vision with the community or the group's vision with the community, and critical details that will affect the community. It provides a platform to communicate calls to action if you want the community to get involved or do something. I've seen locally, in my activity with the planning board, that there are many community members who will not come to a meeting, they will not come to a charrette, they will not come to any kind of formal meeting, but they will let their thoughts be known regarding development projects in town on social media. And like I said before, there's negatives. Of course, there's some chaff to be thrown away there, but there's also some gold, and it really can serve you well. So let's take a look at their website, their Facebook site. So right away, what jumps out is they're driving the values. Again, they're making their values published. They're making them clear. A Facebook site, has very high engagement ability, where a website kind of gets stale. It gets hard to keep the content up to date. I really like how Upper Chichester has established the website. It's rather basic. It sort of just has the pillars of why the group was started. It has things like news. But the Facebook site is really where they're engaging with the public, and you're getting that instant feedback. You're able to communicate. You can reiterate important things about the values, but you're also talking about, hot topics like COVID-19 hospitality industry recovery program. So they're doing a really good job using social media to collect that valuable community input, so that as plans are developed and as zoning code is written and developed, it really reflects what the community thinks. Okay, another spoke in the wheel, Upper Chichester. I thought this one was fabulous because I am an admitted map geek. I love maps. I've always enjoyed cartography. I love maps, and I really like GIS and the possibility that it holds. In fact, we're going to have another webinar in a couple weeks specifically regarding GIS and how GIS improves the development process. So keep an eye out for that. I'll put a little plug in now. I'll plug it later as well. But Upper Chichester and Barbara has done a really good job in using one of Esri's ArcGIS tools called Story Maps. They've done an exceptional job with this. It's an excellent platform for connecting stories that are happening within your community to geographic places. Location intelligence makes stories far more relevant to readers. If they can put a place, it's almost like the old saying, put a face to a name. This is really putting a place to an issue or a place to some bit of news, something that's happening in the community. And it's really effective. Anybody who has an ArcGIS online account can leverage this tool. They're very easy to create. I really recommend you take a look at them. If it's not anything you have any familiarity at, take a look at ArcGIS Story Maps and think through it and see if there's some kind of application you could make to your community. Barbara worked with a Pennsylvania Department of Transportation Connect team to create this site. So again, going back to what we said before, partnerships, right? Barbara may not have had the bandwidth or the ability to do this, but by partnering with PennDOT, she was able to create a really useful site. This site provides highly effective communication platform that connects events, project details, and visions for communities to specific places via GPS. We'll see that in a second. Go ahead and take a look at the site. So we're taking a look at the site here and how it works for those of you who aren't familiar with story maps. Basically what you have is on the left panel, this is your story. Okay, so we're kicking this off with explaining, planning for a vital Chichester Avenue corridor. So the Chichester Avenue corridor is actually, the largest, Broadway type street that intersects with I-95. That actually runs perpendicular to I-95. And like it explains, a street is more than a street. It's the heart of the township. And so they set the stage in what sort of development is occurring on this avenue, because it is really the heart of the community. So meet Chichester Avenue. You're giving the public the ability to acquaint themselves with, okay, we're talking about the Chichester Avenue corridor. Here it is located on the map. So as you scroll through the story, it actually changes the GIS or the map on the right to put a place to a story. So you have the ability to talk about projects that are happening. So rather than have a community who, is uninformed or upset, maybe doesn't understand what is happening with a particular project, you have the ability to explain projects. They do a great job. Why do this project? To reduce congestion and make intersections safer. So this is a great PR tool. It's a great way to engage with the community, to keep them up to date so that citizens are not reaching out or inquiring for info. The more we can keep them fed with info and keep them informed, the more positive and engaged they will be about development in their community. As we scroll through, we can see things like, why do we do this project? To improve safety. Safety was a core value. They talked about that on the heart and soul page, how important safety was. So you can start to see as you go through these different applications, these different tools, they're being very consistent and interconnected, making sure that the values are reaching all the way through the development process in communication with the public. We talk about, there are traffic accidents, we have statistics and the ability to put statistics to a geographical place to explain the story more thoroughly. Why do this project? Business growth, core value of this community. It came up through the heart and soul group that there were too many businesses that were abandoned, and basically, what can we do for economic development? What can we do to redevelop some of those properties that are currently empty? So it's prioritized by community engagement, opportunity to talk about heart and soul, to continue that engagement. We even get into, so we have transportation, more transportation corridor issues, and you really get the picture. We look at a zoning map. I wanted to point this out because I'm going to touch on, this is another interconnected part of this. So zoning updates. Here's a zoning map showing some of the critical zoning updates that are occurring in various districts in the Chichester corridor. So next we'll talk about E-Code 360, and this is where, as a codifier, from our perspective, this is where we often see a huge wall. For many communities, there seems to be a wall right at this point when development thoughts, concerns, goals turn into a plan, and then plans are turned into ordinances. This is where we often feel like it hits the wall, and there seems to be this wall between those plans and when an ordinance actually becomes part of the code. And this is where sometimes, just because of handoffs from one role to another role within the government, we tend to have a little bit of disconnect and not good linkages. This is the general code platform that presents communities, municipal code, and all critical documents such as meeting minutes, agendas, comprehensive plans, permits, forms, and others. So I want to go ahead and look at that and show you how Upper Chichester has really tied their municipal code to many of these other planning tools, groups, documents, meetings. The first I will start with is some communities will post their zoning map, basically a static zoning map here, which is good, but a better solution is what Upper Chichester has, where Upper Chichester has actually built with General Code an interactive zoning map. So this actually functions. I'm going to show you a demo of this in a few minutes as another spoke in the wheel that Upper Chichester has created in user-centered zoning. But this dynamic map is linked right to E-Code 360. So anybody who comes in through the front door looking at specific code, hoping to read through the code, has access to that zoning map, that interactive zoning map, which presents the code in a slightly different way. So I walk down, take a look at new laws. So anybody who comes in who can't find, maybe an ordinance is new and it hasn't made its way into the code yet, as we see here, zoning map amendment, that same zoning map amendment that was presented as news on the ArcGIS story map is actually right here. It is a new amendment that has not made its way into the code, but it's available here to see in its ordinance form. So we can take a look at the ordinance and be connected to recently passed laws in the community. Let's take a look at notes, a feature of eCode 360. What this is showing here is that the Maplink interactive zoning map is actually referenced in several places in the code. So let's take a look. If I were going into the front door of the code, if I were to go to the zoning chapter and look at the zoning chapter, I have a note right here that is telling me an interactive zoning map is available online. Why Upper Chichester put this here is in acknowledgement that Maplink, an interactive zoning map, is actually a more effective way to answer most people's questions about zoning. Attorneys or developers that get deep into code and work with code every day have no problem in this format navigating through the code, or they might think they have no problem with it. But many users that come in to read a code are actually better served by jumping right to an interactive zoning map to answer those questions. So Upper Chichester provides these linkages all throughout, hoping to offer users different ways to access the information they're looking for. So their extensive use of these links is great. So even if somebody dives into, they are looking at low density residential district, they dive into that district, the low density residential district can be found here to the map link. They click on that link and it will actually open not only the interactive map, but now we are actually already diving down into the low density residential district, and we can focus only on those areas in the interactive map where they can then get answers around allowable land uses and other pieces of zoning information. Finally, Upper Chichester populates their public documents portal extensively. So anybody that comes in to look at the code can see all of the type of documents that are related to the code, such as meeting agendas, all located here for all different departments, comprehensive plans, which obviously feed what turns into the zoning code. You can read those here. You can read about an improvement study that's being done, which is actually work like this that's going to inform the new comprehensive plan that they're working on right now. You can look at legislation. All legislation is filed here. If you're doing a deeper dive into how code became code, and all kind of miscellaneous documents. Like I said before, being a map geek, I love that they have all of their historical zoning maps. So if there are questions, you can go back and see when the zoning map changed and how it changed. So you can go, we could go back to the 2002 zoning map and we can see how the zoning map changed over time. So I think they've done a fantastic job with their code portal to make those necessary connections that really helps people understand everything else that's related to build the code. Upper Chichester's economic development site. So the economic development site is connected to the municipal website. It answers frequently asked questions in the community regarding economic development, provides critical information regarding development in the township. Let's take a look at that site. And Barbara actually has a lot more planned for this site. I think it's fantastic as is, but she's continuing to work at it. And again, that was one of those points I talked about early, never stop improving. Something I really respect about Barbara is she's never satisfied with the information she's putting out for her public. She's always looking to improve it. So if we go ahead and take a look at the economic development site, we get a market profile. We can look at things that developers coming into the township would want to see, things like population, daytime versus overnight residents, educational, household family, your standard demographics that economic development is concerned with. So you have the market profile, traffic patterns, census data. If we look at some of the, let's look here, we look at tools. So we'll look at right here, economic development is actually critically related to zoning information. So there is a link again to the Maplink site to get interactive zoning information from the economic development website. Tools, we've got business listings. So you can look and see which businesses are in fact in Upper Chichester. So if you're looking at competitive type information, all that's available, and available properties. So you imagine the power of coming to a site like this, available list, so you can get an address. And then like I'll show you later, it'll actually be the next slide that we look at the Maplink site. You can find right here with one click, you can find available properties and then go to the Maplink site to check for allowable uses to see if your idea for a business could take place there. So all these connections are made. Important links from economic development. Again, this is user-centered design where we have many different ways. People think differently. They organize information differently in their head. They search for things differently. And she's done a wonderful job here providing access, township tools. So this is the Maplink site, the E-code. The code is not just a book to be stored on a bookshelf somewhere. And it's not, it shouldn't be in a place where people have to come ask for it, access to it. It should be available at their fingertips because it's really important, not only from a compliance standpoint, but also from an ideation standpoint. I think that's a little bit different way to look at the code. So for example, we can go right to, if we go to the township website, we see Barbara and her department. And again, she has all this information here. A particular issue I talked about before was some blighted properties or vacant properties were an issue. Rather than answer all of these questions anew every single time they came in, she's created a link that actually drives you right to the section in the code that deals with blighted properties. So for me, that deep link was very clear evidence of somebody who's thinking about her users and also her staff, frankly, and valuing her own time in answering those FAQs. Yeah, this is where I wanted to go. So finally, I'll talk about the Maplink site. Maplink is an interactive zoning map that presents a community's essential elements of its zoning code in a targeted, intuitive way. So right down to the parcel level, along with providing guidance through the development process itself, onto forms, applications, things like that that people need in the development process. The building process of this website provided a unique lens to Upper Chichester through which they saw their zoning code. They really, they changed some ways about how they saw their zoning code as far as it being a functional document and how they might want to change its presentation to make it clearer for people to understand. So let's take a look at their Maplink site briefly. If we bring up the Maplink site, let's take a look at, for example, if I were wanting to bring a business to town, I would filter by a land use, and I would look at, let's say I want to look at drive-through restaurant. So with one click, I can focus only on the parcels where drive-through restaurants are allowed. I can cross-reference this with the information on the economic development site as far as available properties. It's just providing a whole lot of information without ever having to walk into the office or pick up the phone. We can find out more information just to make sure, are we defining the drive-through properly? Is it a drive-in versus a drive-through? We've taken pieces of the code and actually presented it in a way that allows people with just a few clicks to get exactly what they need. If we do the opposite kind of search and we have an address or we click on a parcel itself, and turn this down. Maplink allows you to change some of that opacity so you can see some streets, you verify what street you're on. I can get very detailed zoning information right down to the parcel level. Upper Chichester actually drove development of this feature where, for example, if I were developing something on this parcel and needed to notify abutting properties. This gives me all my abutting properties. I create a mailing list with, again, 2 or 3 clicks. I now have a mailing list where I can contact, I can send out abutters notifications for development on this property. If I'm interested in zoning details on this property, I click and I get a customized report on all of the zoning regulations for that property, dimensional standards, all of my allowed uses. This would confirm for me if this was my property. I could confirm things like, can I put a home occupation business such as a daycare or a home office? It confirms everything right down to the parcel level with just a few clicks. Like I mentioned before, it also addresses, if we look at the procedures, we can also follow through and understand these procedures. For example, anybody in Pennsylvania familiar with saldo application and submission process? We have pulled out the piece of the code that addresses saldo application, and we provide the documents right there, the saldo application process. Barbara has also included the saldo application packet on the municipal website. I believe it's on the economic development website. So again, many spokes in this wheel of being user-centered with presenting all the zoning information. I do want to get into I want to reveal a little bit of the question and answer session that I had with Barbara in preparation. But before that, I want to do another poll. I would like to ask everybody in your community, which is the main driver of proposed changes to your current zoning or land use code? Is the main driver economic development, historical preservation or placemaking, affordable housing, transportation access, or something other? And again, other, I'd love to hear after the webinar what those other considerations are. Lopsided, staggering, economic development. That's dropping. Okay, it's still going to be our majority by far. 74% economic development, 5% historic preservation or placemaking, and 21% other. So I'm definitely interested in that 21%. I'd love to hear in the Q&A or afterwards in email what those other considerations are that are driving proposed changes to your zoning or land use code. Okay, so I want to run through some Q&A that I did with Barbara in preparation for a case study, which will also be available on the generalcode.com website if you'd like to look at that case study for Upper Chichester. I asked Barbara what pain points have been eliminated or reduced through using Maplink, and she said clear communication of procedures in code links. So those linkages, very, very important. What's really been big for her is accurately pinpointing the parcel in the zoning map. Think about your own zoning map and think about how it's presented online or with your zoning code. Most zoning maps that I see do not contain identifiable parcels or addresses right down to the parcel level. Sometimes they're very old, they're copies of copies, and it's very hard to clearly understand where a particular parcel is, especially if it's on a boundary between zoning districts. Public access to the zoning map online was very important to Barbara, and like I said, she really helped us drive that that add-on of the measurements to abutting properties. This was a time-consuming activity for her. And with that interactive mapping tool, we were able to help her save time and effort in getting those abutting property reports. I asked Barbara, how has Maplink made things easier for the community? It answers the simple zoning code questions with emphasis on the simple. It doesn't answer all zoning code questions, but it answers the majority of the simple questions. Examples like I shared with you about home occupancy business. Can I put a daycare center on my residential property? Those are the kind of questions that she is really seeing cut down on. Those very simple yes, no, those questions really add up throughout a day, throughout a week, throughout a year. She's cut out a significant number of those questions coming in. It confirms answers for more knowledgeable users. So think more about realtors, developers. It confirms the answers because the regularity the regularity of the time that they spend in a zoning code or a land use code. These users usually think they know the answer, so they're using Maplink as confirmation. So it's a quick confirmation, even if it's a more complex question. Maplink has improved clarity around the permitting process by all those linkages, all of those permitting applications, forms, and the procedures involved, walking people through the development process so that their first reaction is not to pick up the phone and call or walk in and ask the questions about what do I do next? What forms do I need? What do I need to fill out? It provides clear access to the permit forms themselves. And like I said before, clarifies in which zoning district a property is located. Has Maplink helped the community during the pandemic? She said it has helped immensely with the continuation of projects. So as everybody sort of stumbled with online meetings and struggling with how do we connect when we can't be in person with one another, it really helped keep projects moving in that we didn't have a backlog of people waiting to call in. We didn't have a backlog of emails. People were really able to self-help. So I think that's we should hold that as a as a reminder that in the pandemic being a bad event that thankfully doesn't occur very often. I think we've learned a lot about if it helped during a pandemic, it really helps all the time to help continuing projects and keeping them moving. It has replaced trips to the office flawlessly. It has reduced phone and email traffic significantly and has kept staff free to work on more complex questions. So dedicating that staff to those more complex development projects like just larger developments that are more complex in nature, it's freed up that staff by not having to answer the volume of questions and has allowed them to go deeper in helping people with the more complex ones. How has Maplink been received by staff in the community? The zoning officer on the staff sees great value in it, saves time. It eliminates that need to carry one-off notebooks, spreadsheets, cheat sheets. It gives them a tool that, with a laptop and an internet connection, they're able to get that information easily. And it's always kept up to date. They don't have to keep that up to date themselves. Developers and realtors have been trained to use it. Barbara's done a wonderful job training people to use the site. It's been evidenced by people asking basic questions about the site, so that's evidence they're using it. And it's a great reference tool for people when discussing the zoning code. So in clarifying things, she's actually, even if they do call over the phone, she's using Maplink to guide people through the questions, and having that visual on their screen as she speaks to Barbara over the phone, it really helps people to understand more than just getting verbal directions. So I'd like to end the Q&A with Barbara on a quote from her that nicely sums up how adding a spoke to the wheel like an interactive zoning map has helped her community from a user's perspective. She says, the questions we get now are a lot more focused and informed because in many cases, the person used the online map first. Okay, so they had a baseline of knowledge there. Users are able to confirm information they find on Maplink, so we aren't starting from scratch as far as finding information. And I can send more educated emails to my zoning officer so he can better help answer their questions. So it's really about getting those basic questions out of the way to have a deeper, more efficient, more effective conversation. So in review, what has worked for Upper Chi, regarding what the framework we've laid for being user-centered and how you design your zoning and land use code systems and tools. Upper Chichester's Heart and Soul group maintains value statements, very important step toward community alignment. So they've adopted a user-centered value statement. fully understands its users, their roles, their needs, and their pain points. They keep the community engaged through meetings and input through their social media, like their Facebook page and ArcGIS story map. They have adopted work processes to become more user-centered. They manage their touch points, inbound and outbound communications, forms, applications, etc., in multiple places like Eco360 and Maplink on the economic development website, all with linkages to one another. They've collaborated on code content and access ideas with others, and also adopted appropriate tools and technologies to improve access and clarity of their code. They have clearly demonstrated in a little bit of what I've shown you today of using multiple technologies to develop and communicate regulations and procedures as transparently as possible. So just a few closing thoughts of my own as we start to wrap up. As a host and maintainer of over 3,000 municipal codes, at General Code, we often see lots of time and money and effort spent by clients on pre-planning and planning activities. But like I said before, there often seems to be this wall that occurs from the pre-planning and the planning activities. Once those pre-planning and planning activities become ordinances and codes, there seems sometimes to be a disconnect where the user tends not to be really considered or included anymore at that point. And I think that's a miss, and I know for sure, like what we've seen from Upper Chichester today, we can do a better job of making those connections. Things like comprehensive plans, zoning and land use code, charrettes are often, they're done without much thought on how the resulting code and regulations will be communicated. So I think we have to look all the way through. Don't just think about how we create that end document at the end of our work in planning, but also how do we communicate this and keep this going throughout the development process. The process needs to become more iterative and interconnected if we're to keep the users at the center of everything. And that is our mission in the end, to serve our constituents to the very best of our ability. And like I've said on some of the poll questions, General Code's really interested in hearing the unique challenges that you face so that we can help by evolving our products and services to meet the special code-related needs of building, planning, and zoning professionals. As we see here in the graphic, what I described, where I think we currently are in many places, and I think we're in transition, but we really see sort of a disjointed linear process in the past with planning turning into administrative activities like, passing ordinances, which then turn into codes, and then eventually they get to the users. I think the ideal future state is always keeping the users at the center and constantly having connection between planning activities and administrative activities and code creation and publishing revolving around the user. So I'd like to open it up to some Q&A right now. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to jump on the question pod. And Jeannie, if you could let me know if we have any questions coming in, I would appreciate it.
Like crazy to do that, Wayne. I've been talking with some people. Let me kick one to you quickly. Would you be able to provide some examples of how to make zoning text more readable to the general public? I have heard you go on about this, and I really like it. So when they asked the question, I thought, oh yes, this is good.
Yes, absolutely. We've actually seen a lot of that. So I would be happy to provide, if you could just leave your email contact, I can provide you with many different examples of that. We've seen a lot of like I said at the beginning of today's presentation, zoning chapters or land use chapters are amongst the most frequently updated parts of any municipal code. Obviously fees, V&T regulations, things, street names, things like that are also very frequently updated. But in particular, there are holes. When we see zoning codes updated, often it's an entire zoning code that's updated. And often it's for the reasons you're talking about, is public expectations have really changed in that once upon a time, as long as the zoning code passed the muster of the attorneys involved, that's really all that mattered, because really it was just attorneys talking to attorneys. Our world has changed in that people expect to be able to get online, get on their phone, and access the information they need and be able to understand it. And communities have a duty to be transparent. So I can absolutely provide examples of how language has changed to be more readable. There's also things like, it's not always just language. One of the best examples I can give you is if your zoning code does not extensively use tables, reference tables, that's a huge opportunity to improve the readability of your code. As our production team has built Maplink sites for our customers, we have found that building effective Maplink sites is it's faster to do, it's easier to do, and you end up with a better product if your zoning code contains reference tables. So things like allowable use tables. If you instead of having it written as text and forcing people to read through paragraphs and paragraphs of text, and you can simply have a lookup that says, here's the zoning district I'm in, here's the allowable use, yes, no, or is it conditional use? So tables, I really would stress tables, but if you leave your email address, I'd be happy to have a follow-up. Any others, Jeannie?
I keep muting myself, Wayne. I'm thinking of where to go. Some people are asking about the upkeep of the code in the Maplink site. Do you want to talk about a little bit in general terms?
Sure. So, and again, if you have any specific questions, if you, for example, see particular challenges to your case, please, again, reach out. I'd be happy to give you, if you gave me your situation, I could give you a more tailored answer. But in general, what we do, and actually why General Code is well positioned precisely for this, is we build Maplink sites from the zoning code that we maintain for people on Ecode 360. We do have several sites that we've built for people who are not code customers of General Code. So by no means is that a requirement, but what's really great about the update process is if you're a General Code customer, we're using that code. So you're not at risk of this cut and paste disjointed asynchronous situation where General Code takes a new ordinance that updates your zoning code, and your online code portal says one thing about your zoning code, but if you didn't have a chance to update it, that's not happening. Our production team is syncing that, and those changes are made at the same time. So that's actually one of the big benefits. There are options in the marketplace for different sorts of tools similar to Maplink and Zoning Hub, which is the platform that we partner with to present Maplink. But the disconnect is often the amount of effort that goes into updating those, or it being a disjointed asynchronous process where you're at risk of presenting your zoning code two different, at the same time in two different ways. So that doesn't happen with the Maplink updating. I hope that answered your question. If it didn't, we certainly can follow up later.
Wayne, a lot of people are asking questions about pricing in general. And so in some cases, I'm trying to get back to them, talk to them a little bit about population, but I don't know if you can talk in general terms or give people an idea. Perhaps they've seen other products that, I don't know, that maybe they have a point of reference. If you could do anything to help out there without getting specific, that'd be great.
Okay, so specifically with the Maplink product, I know other similar type solutions in the marketplace. I think the best way to do this is to see, because there is a difference based on the size of your community. Obviously, building a site like that with that kind of code content for New York City versus my hometown, Lima, 5,000 people, is a very different proposition. So the pricing is based, as far as the building part of it, is based on We build the site, but then there's also a difference as far as the amount of changes that are made. We factor that in. But what I will say about Maplink is most people, if not all people we've ever talked price with, are absolutely shocked at how cost effective it is. And it's really easy from an ROI perspective to justify. It's very low cost. We're talking, in most cases, we're talking under 5 figures. So I'd be happy to talk pricing. Let's look at the size of your community. Let's look at the situation. Because everybody's community is a little different. So let's take a look at that individually, but very, very cost competitive compared to other similar solutions I've seen in the marketplace, which are tens of thousands of dollars more. So just in wrapping up, respecting everyone's time, we do have another upcoming webinar in the Building Resilience series that is improving land use in the development process with GIS. That's going to be a little more broad-based, a little wider in its scope, but definitely tying into some of the same principles and demos that you saw today. That is, and by the way, that's Wednesday, March 24th at 2 p.m. Eastern time. I'd like to thank everyone for spending their valuable time with us today. If you have any questions following today's webinar, I'm sorry I got cut short on the Q&A a little bit. Feel free to contact me. My email is here. You can contact us through General Code. We've provided links to connect with us here. We've also provided you with a PDF takeaway version of today's webinar that contains links to all of the sites we visited today if you want to look at those a little deeper. Upper Chichester's done a fabulous job, I'm sure that Barbara Kelly would be very happy to answer any questions as well. There's also a case study capturing the Upper Chichester successes available as a takeaway. So feel free to email me. And again, thank you so much for your time and have a great day.